The city park was quiet in the early evening, the sky beginning to take on shades of deep purple and navy blue as dusk settled in. The faint sound of children playing echoed from a nearby playground, and families enjoyed their evening walks under the glow of the street lamps. In the middle of this calm scene was Sara Montgomery, a tall, athletic black woman in her early 40s with a warm but determined expression that reflected years of resilience. With her was her 10-year-old daughter, Sara, a lively and curious girl who idolized her mother and hung on her every word. Tonight was a special evening for them both. It was one of those rare days when Sara could leave her worries behind and spend uninterrupted time with Sara, showing her the basics of skateboarding, a new hobby that Sara had recently become obsessed with. Sara, who had grown up skateboarding on rougher streets than this, was thrilled to share her skills with her daughter, eager to see her learn the same balance and confidence that had carried Sara through so many challenges in her own life. As Sara placed her foot on the skateboard and wobbled, Sara laughed and held her arms out, ready to catch her if she fell. "Just keep your knees bent, baby," Sara said, her voice gentle but firm. "And remember, if you lose balance, don't be afraid. Just let yourself fall naturally. I'm here, and you'll be fine." Sara looked up at her mother with wide, trusting eyes and gave a determined nod. For her, this was more than just a lesson in skateboarding. It was a chance to be like her mom, brave, steady, and unafraid. While Sara focused on her daughter, she remained alert, her instincts honed from years of experience in dealing with difficult situations. Her life had not been easy. Raised in a rough neighborhood and having faced countless challenges, Sara had learned to defend herself both physically and emotionally. She was a fighter by nature, though she rarely showed this side of herself, especially in public. Her past had shaped her into a resilient woman who knew how to stay calm under pressure, a trait she now hoped to pass on to Sara. But tonight was supposed to be about joy, not survival. She pushed those thoughts aside and focused on Sara, watching her daughter beam with pride every time she managed to stay balanced on the skateboard a few seconds longer. To Sara, these small moments were precious. They were rare breaks in a life filled with hard work and responsibility. As a single mother, Sara worked tirelessly to provide for her family, and moments like these were her reward, a chance to be present and connect with her daughter in ways that went beyond words. In the distance, however, a figure appeared, moving purposefully toward them. It was Officer Mark Copeland, a middle-aged white police officer with a reputation that was well known around town, but not for reasons he'd want anyone to celebrate. He had served on the force for nearly 2 decades, but those years had left him bitter, hardened by a life he felt had cheated him out of the success he deserved. His frustration had long since twisted into resentment, and his prejudices, once subtle, had become more blatant over time. Mark Copeland had a particularly deep-seated bias against black residents in his jurisdiction. He viewed them with suspicion and disdain, often believing they didn't belong in certain parts of town. His biases had led him to harass numerous innocent people under the guise of protecting the neighborhood. And tonight, seeing Sara and Sara in what he considered a clean park filled with mostly white families triggered his prejudice. In his mind, Sara was just another black woman who needed to be reminded of her place. As he approached, Sara noticed him out of the corner of her eye. Her body instinctively tensed, but she maintained her outward calm. She didn't want to alarm Sara, who was still wobbling on her skateboard, oblivious to the officer's approach. Sara had encountered officers like Stone before, men who saw her skin color as a threat, men who assumed she was troubled without ever knowing her story. She had long since learned to handle these encounters with restraint, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her react. But as the officer's heavy boots crunched closer on the gravel path, Sara's instincts told her that this time might be different. Copeland stopped a few feet away, his stance aggressive and his eyes cold. He looked at Sara and Sara with a barely concealed sneer, as if their mere presence in the park was an affront. Without any formalities, he barked, "You don't belong here." His voice was loud enough to catch Sara's attention, and the little girl turned to look at him, confusion in her eyes. Sara took a deep breath, suppressing the surge of anger rising within her. She stepped forward slightly, shielding Sara with her body. She had no intention of letting this man intimidate her or her daughter, especially on what was supposed to be their night of bonding. "We're just enjoying the park, officer," she said calmly, her voice steady. "It's public property, and we have every right to be here." The officer's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer, intruding into her personal space. "You think you can just do whatever you want, don't you?" he said, his tone dripping with contempt. "I've seen people like you before, causing trouble, thinking you own the place." He barely glanced at Sara, who had instinctively moved closer to her mother, her small hand gripping Sara's shirt. Sara was old enough to sense the tension, even if she didn't fully understand it. Sara clenched her jaw, her fists tightening at her sides, but she forced herself to stay calm for Sara's sake. She looked the officer straight in the eye and said, "I don't know what you think we're doing here, but we're not causing any trouble. My daughter is just learning how to skateboard, that's all." Officer Stone laughed a harsh, mocking sound. "Oh, I bet. Teaching her how to break rules early, huh? Starting them young, just like the rest of you." His words were sharp, each one a deliberate attempt to provoke. He was pushing, testing to see if he could break the calm exterior she wore so well. Sara felt her control slipping, her anger simmering beneath the surface. But she reminded herself that reacting would only make things worse. She knew men like him thrived on control, on forcing others to submit. But she was not going to let him intimidate her or make her daughter feel unsafe. However, as Sara stood her ground, something in her silence seemed to enrage Officer Stone further. He wasn't used to people, especially black women, holding their own against him. He took another step forward, towering over her now, and sneered, "Maybe I should teach you a lesson about respect." And with that, he did the unthinkable. In a sudden, unprovoked move, he raised his hand and slapped Sara across the face. The force of the blow made her stumble back a step, and the sharp sting radiated across her cheek. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Sara gasped, her small voice breaking the silence, and her eyes filled with fear as she looked at her mother, not fully understanding but terrified nonetheless. Sara straightened, her hand instinctively reaching up to touch her cheek. Her face burned with pain, but what hurt more was the humiliation, the blatant show of power and disregard for her humanity. She looked up at Stone, and in that moment, something shifted. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about Sara, who was watching everything. It was about every time she'd been told to know her place, and now, more than ever, she felt the need to show her daughter that no one had the right to treat them this way. Didn't deserve the same respect as others, but to strike her in front of her daughter was a line she could not allow him to cross without consequence. Sara's instincts screamed at her to retaliate, but she was painfully aware of the power dynamic. Stone wore a badge, and as a single black mother, she understood the dangers that came with standing up to authority figures who had no hesitation in abusing their power. Yet something inside her shifted as she looked at Lila. Her daughter was watching, and Sara could not afford to let fear dictate her response. Sara straightened up, fixing her gaze on Stone with a fierce determination that caught even him off guard. She saw a flicker of doubt cross his face, a hesitation as he realized she wasn't going to simply shrink away in submission. But before he could fully process it, Sara spoke. Her voice was steady and sharp, cutting through the tense silence between them. "You had no right to touch me," she said, her tone low but resolute. "I haven't done anything wrong, and you know it. Whatever authority you think you have doesn't give you the right to assault people. Not me, and not anyone." Copeland's face twisted into a sneer. His eyes narrowed as he looked at her, clearly not accustomed to defiance, especially not from someone he viewed as beneath him. He stepped closer, his presence looming, and his voice laced with condescension and barely disguised contempt. "Who do you think you are, talking to me like that?" he spat, looking her up and down as if she was something he'd found under his boot. "You should know your place. You think you can just waltz around here acting like you own the place? You people are all the same, thinking the rules don't apply to you." Sara clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms as she fought to control her anger. She could feel Lila's grip tightening on her arm, her daughter's silent plea for safety pulling her back from the edge. But she couldn't just let this go, not this time, not with Lila watching. This was her moment to show her daughter that they didn't have to accept being treated as less than anyone else. She took another step forward, closing the distance between her and Stone. Her voice was calm, almost icy, and the unwavering confidence in her tone caught him off guard. "I don't care what you think of me," she said, each word deliberate, "but you will not touch me again. Not here, not anywhere. Not in front of my daughter." Her words hung in the air, a bold challenge to the authority he so clearly believed he had over her. She could see the conflict flash across his face, a mix of anger and surprise as he processed her defiance. Stone's grip on his own authority was slipping, and it was evident that he didn't know how to handle someone like her, someone who wasn't afraid to call him out. His face flushed with anger, and his voice dropped to a near growl. "You think you're brave, don't you? You think I want to put you in your place? Let me remind you that I'm the one in control here. I could arrest you right now if I wanted to." Sara held her ground, her gaze steady and unyielding. "You can try," she replied coolly, "but you'll regret it." Stone's hand twitched as if he were considering reaching for his handcuffs, but something about the way Sara stood unwavering and unafraid seemed to unnerve him. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like her. He glanced around, perhaps realizing that there were more people in the park now, that eyes were beginning to turn their way. He was no longer in control of the narrative, and the possibility of witnesses watching him lose control seemed to bring a hint of doubt into his otherwise arrogant demeanor. Sara sensed his hesitation, and it only strengthened her resolve. She took a small controlled step back, just enough to give herself a bit more distance, but her eyes never left his. Her voice softened not out of fear, but as a deliberate choice to show him that she was not afraid. "You can intimidate people all you want, Officer Stone," she said, her voice calm, but the underlying strength unmistakable. "But it won't work on me. I know my rights and I know yours. What you did was assault, and there are consequences for that." Copeland's face darkened as he took a step forward, his jaw clenched, clearly not willing to let her have the last word. "Consequences?" He laughed, though the sound was hollow. "For you, maybe. But don't think for a second that anyone's going to take your side over mine." Sara felt the familiar sting of those words, a reminder of the inequality that permeated her life and the lives of so many others. But instead of letting it dishearten her, it only fueled her determination. She was done allowing people like Stone to dictate her life, to make her feel small, to teach her daughter that this was normal, that this was something they had to accept. Just then, a passerby, an older man with a grizzled beard and a weathered face, stopped nearby, watching the interaction with a look of concern. Sara saw him out of the corner of her eye, and a glimmer of hope flickered within her. She wasn't alone. She didn't need an army. She just needed one person, one witness who could see the truth of what was happening. Sensing his growing loss of control, Stone's face twisted further in anger. He could feel his grip on the situation slipping, and it infuriated him. Without warning, he reached out, grabbing Sara's arm, his fingers digging into her skin. The suddenness of the motion startled her, and for a split second, her resolve wavered. But then instinct took over. In a swift motion, Sara twisted her arm, breaking free from his grip with a move she hadn't practiced in years but remembered well. She took a step back, positioning herself between Stone and Lila, her stance steady and prepared. Her years of training in self-defense flooded back every lesson she'd learned about protecting herself and those she loved. She had tried to keep things calm to avoid escalation, but Stone had forced her hand. He had crossed a line that she could no longer ignore. Copeland's face turned from arrogance to shock as he stumbled back, momentarily thrown off balance by her unexpected resistance. The passerby stepped closer, his eyes widening as he realized what was happening, and a few other people nearby started to watch more closely, their murmurs growing louder. Let go of my mother. Lila's voice cut through the tension, clear and strong despite the fear in her eyes. She took a brave step forward, standing beside Sara, her small frame brimming with determination. Sara placed a protective arm around Lila's shoulders, her gaze still locked on Stone. Her voice was calm, but the underlying strength was unmistakable. You have no right to touch us. If you so much as think about laying another hand on me or my daughter, I promise you this will not end well for you. For a moment, Stone's bravado faltered. He was used to people backing down to him, cowering in fear, especially when he resorted to force. But Sara was different. She didn't just stand her ground, she was ready to defend herself if necessary. And he could see that in her eyes. She was no ordinary woman. She was a mother, a protector, someone who had nothing to lose when it came to defending her family. The crowd around them continued to grow, and Stone finally seemed to grasp that he was outmatched not in strength, but in support. His jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides, but he could see that the situation was no longer in his favor. He took a step back, the anger still burning in his eyes, but there was a hint of something else now, hesitation, maybe even fear. Sara watched him, refusing to break eye contact. She had stood her ground, protected her daughter, and shown Stone that he could not bully her into submission. She didn't need to raise her voice or fight back with aggression. Her strength came from her resolve, from her unshakable commitment to her daughter, and from her refusal to be intimidated. As Stone turned and walked away, muttering under his breath, Sara finally allowed herself to breathe, pulling Lila into a tight embrace. Sara skimmed through the papers, her hands shaking as she read about people who had faced similar brutality, intimidation, and false accusations. She felt a surge of anger as she recognized the familiar patterns innocent people harassed, lives disrupted, all because Stone and others like him felt untouchable. Her anger turned to determination as she met Owen's gaze. So, what are we going to do? She asked, her voice laced with a newfound resolve. Owens leaned forward, his expression intense. I want to make this public. We need to get your story out there. I know a few trusted reporters who would be interested in exposing Stone's history, and we can pressure the department to take action. But Sara, he paused, looking at her with concern. This won't be easy. Once we go down this path, Stone and his supporters won't back down. They'll do everything they can to discredit you, to make you look like the aggressor. Sara took a deep breath, glancing back toward the kitchen where Lila was busy coloring at the table. I understand the risks, she said, her voice unwavering, but I can't let him get away with this. Not anymore. Owens nodded, respect gleaming in his eyes. Then let us get to work. The next few days were a whirlwind of interviews, meetings, and preparations. Owens arranged for Sara to meet with a journalist from a reputable publication known for its investigative work on police misconduct. Sara poured her heart out, recounting the traumatic encounter in the park and the terror she had felt for her daughter. She spoke not only about her experience but about the countless other families affected by officers like Stone. The article was published a week later, titled When Those Who Swore to Protect Become the Threat. It detailed Sara's story alongside testimonies from other victims who had encountered Stone. The article went viral within hours, igniting outrage and sparking calls for action. Social media erupted with hashtags demanding justice, and the police department found itself under intense scrutiny as the public called for an investigation into Stone's actions. But Sara knew this exposure would provoke a response, and not a friendly one. That night, as she was tucking Lila into bed, her phone vibrated with a notification. It was a text message from an unknown number. You think you're a hero. This isn't over. You have no idea what you've started. Her blood ran cold. She didn't need to guess who it was. The veiled threat was all too familiar, and she knew it was Stone trying to intimidate her into silence. She deleted the message, not wanting Lila to see, but the threat lingered in her mind, seeping into her thoughts like a dark, heavy fog. She sat in the living room alone, trying to steady her breathing, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. The next morning, Sara found a police car parked across the street from her house. She could feel the officer's eyes on her as she left to take Lila to school, their stares a silent reminder that they were watching her every move. She tried to act nonchalant for Lila's sake, but inside, her anxiety churned a constant hum that wouldn't let her rest. At work, she noticed the same pattern. Officers would occasionally pass by the store where she worked, casting pointed glances through the windows. Their presence was heavy and unsettling. They were trying to break her, to make her feel isolated. But Sara held firm, reminding herself of the support she had and the justice she was fighting for. Later that day, she received a call from Owens. His voice was calm, but there was a tension there that she hadn't heard before. "Sara, I just received a tip from one of my contacts at the department. Apparently, there's been talk of revisiting your record. They're trying to dig up anything they can use against you, any past incident, no matter how minor, to make you look like the problem." Sara clenched her jaw, anger sparking in her chest. "They're trying to discredit me?" "Yes," Owens replied. "It's a common tactic. They're hoping to make the public question your credibility, to shift the narrative in their favor. But I want you to know that we're prepared for this. I'll do everything in my power to protect you legally, and there are people who believe in you, people who will stand by you no matter what." Sara took a deep breath, her mind racing as she processed his words. "Thank you, Derek. I'm not backing down. I just need to know that Lila will be safe through all of this." "She will be," Owens assured her. "I promise you, we're in this together." As the weeks passed, the tension only grew. Sara became a symbol of resilience and courage, her story resonating with people across the city and beyond. But with her growing visibility came escalating threats. She received anonymous calls late at night, messages that veiled threats in polite words, and even strange cars parked outside her house for hours. The intimidation tactics were relentless, a constant reminder that Stone and his supporters were willing to go to any lengths to protect their power. One evening, as Sara was closing up the store where she worked, she heard footsteps approaching from behind her. Her pulse quickened, and she turned to find Stone standing there, his face twisted in a smug smile. Her body went rigid, every muscle tensing as she prepared herself for whatever was coming. "You just couldn't let it go, could you?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you're some kind of hero, stirring up trouble. But I'm warning you, Sara, this isn't going to end well for you." Sara's eyes narrowed, her fear quickly transforming into anger. "You don't scare me, Stone. You're nothing more than a bully hiding behind a badge, and I'm not going to let you or anyone else intimidate me." His smile faltered, replaced by a flash of rage. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, his face inches from hers. "You think you're brave? You're just a pawn in a game you don't understand. People like me, we're untouchable. You can scream and cry all you want, but in the end, I'll still be here. And you'll be nothing but a cautionary tale." Sara held her ground, refusing to let him see her fear. "We'll see about that. People like you always think you're invincible, until you're not." He chuckled, a hollow, menacing sound that echoed in the empty store. "Keep dreaming, but don't say I didn't warn you." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Sara standing there, her hands clenched into fists. Her mind swirled with a mixture of anger, fear, and defiance. She knew the road ahead would be difficult. Stone wouldn't stop until he tried everything to destroy her. But she also knew she wasn't alone. The next day, Owens called with an update. "The public pressure is building, Sara. The department has announced they're opening an investigation into Stone. This is huge. It's the first real step toward holding him accountable." Sara felt a surge of relief, a glimmer of hope breaking through the darkness. But Owens' tone was cautious. "Don't let your guard down. Stone and his allies won't take this lightly. They're likely to retaliate, to try and make this as difficult as possible for you." Sara nodded, her determination stealing. "I understand. I'm ready for whatever comes next." For the first time, he seemed small, diminished in the face of the truth that was about to be revealed. Sara took a deep breath, her heart pounding with both fear and anticipation. "I am here today," she began, her voice steady, "because I refuse to be silenced. I am here not just for myself, but for every person who has ever faced injustice, who has ever been told that they don't matter. This is our fight, and we will not back down." The courtroom fell silent, every eye fixed on Sara as she spoke. In that moment, she was more than just a victim, she was a symbol of courage, a beacon of hope for everyone who had ever been afraid to stand up for themselves. As she left the courthouse later that day with Lila by her side, she knew the fight was far from over, but she also knew that she had made a difference. She had shown her daughter and the world that sometimes standing up was the only way forward. As they walked away hand in hand, Sara felt a quiet, unbreakable strength within her, a promise that no matter what came next, she would keep fighting for the justice they all deserved. The day of the hearing had finally arrived, casting a tense silence over the courtroom as people took their seats, murmuring in anticipation. Sara sat at the front, her gaze steady, her heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and defiance. She had waited for this moment, for the chance to finally speak the truth without fear, to confront Officer Stone in front of everyone. Beside her sat Theo Harrington, her steadfast ally, a silent force of reassurance. Behind her, a wave of community members filled the room, friends, neighbors, strangers who had been touched by her story and had come to show their support. At the opposite side of the room sat Officer Stone, his face tense and flushed, his attorney leaning close, whispering hurried words. Sara could see the unease etched in his features. He wasn't the towering figure he had been in the park, where his authority had granted him a sense of untouchability. Here, stripped of his badge and the comfort of his uniform, he looked small, almost cornered, knowing that the power he had once used so freely was slipping out of his grasp. The judge called the court to order, and as the room fell silent, Sara felt her pulse quicken. The weight of this moment pressed on her, but she took a deep breath, grounding herself in the faces of those who believed in her, especially her daughter Lila, who was seated behind her. Her young eyes were wide with admiration and hope as the proceedings began. Officer Stone's attorney attempted to paint a picture of a dutiful officer who had been provoked into action. They recounted a twisted version of events, one in which Sara had aggressively resisted a simple request, where her hostile attitude had supposedly justified his actions. Sara's anger simmered as she listened to the lies, feeling the familiar sting of frustration that came with knowing how easily authority could distort the truth. But this time, she wasn't alone, and she wasn't helpless. Owens rose from his seat, his calm, assured demeanor a direct contrast to Stone's agitated lawyer. He began to methodically dismantle their claims, highlighting inconsistencies in Stone's story, calling attention to witness statements and evidence that contradicted the officer's account. Bit by bit, he exposed the falseness of Stone's defense, his voice measured and unwavering. Each point drove home the undeniable truth of what had happened that day in the park. Finally, it was Sara's turn to take the stand. She felt a wave of nerves rise within her as she walked to the front, facing the judge and jury. Her heart pounded with the gravity of what she was about to say. She took a deep breath, focusing on Lila's face in the audience. Her daughter's gaze gave her the strength she needed. "I came here today," she began, her voice clear but filled with emotion, "because I want justice. Not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever been made to feel small, to feel powerless in the face of someone who abuses their authority." Her voice grew steadier as she recounted the events of that day, describing the fear and humiliation she had felt as Stone had accosted her in front of her daughter. She spoke of the moment he struck her, the pain and anger that had surged within her, and how she had stood her ground not out of disrespect, but out of a deep need to protect herself and her child. "I knew that if I didn't stand up then," she said, glancing at the jury, "I would be teaching my daughter that it's okay to let people treat us as less than human. That's not a lesson I ever want her to learn." The courtroom was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Sara glanced briefly at Stone, noting the tightness of his expression, the way he avoided her gaze. The bravado that had marked his demeanor in the park was gone, replaced by an unmistakable sense of vulnerability. For the first time, she saw him as he was, a man stripped of his power, facing the consequences of his actions. When she finished, she took her seat, feeling the collective strength of everyone around her, their silent support bolstering her resolve. The final testimony was a powerful moment that shifted the tide even further in Sara's favor. One by one, witnesses came forward, recounting their own experiences with Officer Stone, describing similar incidents of intimidation, aggression, and blatant abuse of power. A former colleague of Stone's testified, reluctantly admitting to witnessing incidents of misconduct but feeling powerless to speak up in the past. The stories painted a damning portrait of a man who had long considered himself above the law, a man who had grown comfortable in a role that allowed him to wield power without accountability. By the end of the day, it was clear that the case had taken a decisive turn. The evidence was undeniable, and the stories of Stone's past behavior were too consistent to ignore. As the judge delivered the final instructions to the jury, Sara felt a sense of peace settle over her. The weight of the past few weeks lifted, replaced by a quiet, fierce hope. The jury deliberated for hours, the tension in the courtroom thick as they waited for the verdict. Sara sat with Owens, Lila by her side, both of them holding her hands, their presence grounding her, a reminder of the strength she had found not only in herself, but in those who believed in her. Finally, the jury returned, their faces solemn but determined. Sara held her breath as the foreperson rose, delivering the verdict with a clear, steady voice. Guilty! The word echoed in the courtroom, a single syllable that seemed to reverberate with the weight of justice finally being served. Relief washed over Sara, a flood of emotions overwhelming her, as she realized that she had won. She had stood up, faced her fear, and emerged victorious, proving not only to herself but to everyone watching that truth and resilience could indeed prevail. As the room erupted into murmurs, Owens leaned over, his voice filled with pride. You did it, Sara. You didn't just stand up for yourself, you stood up for everyone who has ever been silenced. Sara turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. I couldn't have done it without you, without everyone who believed in me. She looked at Lila, who was beaming, her face shining with pride and love. As they left the courthouse, a crowd had gathered outside, a sea of faces filled with admiration. Their cheers and applause filled the air. Sara felt a surge of gratitude, her heart swelling as she realized the impact of her journey. She had become more than a symbol of resistance, she was a beacon of hope for those who had been voiceless, a reminder that courage could indeed change lives. She knelt down, pulling Lila into a tight embrace, whispering softly, Remember this moment, sweetheart. Remember that no matter how hard things get, you're never alone. There's always strength in standing up for what is right. Lila hugged her back, her small arms wrapped around her mother with a fierce love that transcended words. I'm so proud of you, Mom, she whispered. You're the bravest person I know. You did it, Mom, she whispered. You're the bravest person I know. Sara stood, taking a moment to soak in the support of the people around her. The warmth of their gratitude was like a balm over every scar that had been left by the past few weeks. She took Owens's hand, a silent promise passing between them that they would continue the fight, that they would work to dismantle the systems that allowed people like Stone to abuse their power unchecked. As they walked away from the courthouse surrounded by supporters, Sara felt a new sense of purpose take root within her. This victory was only the beginning. She knew there were others out there, people who had been silenced and needed the same support she had received. She was ready to be that support, to continue fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. And as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the courthouse steps, Sara felt an unbreakable strength rise within her. She had faced her greatest fears, she had confronted the injustice that had tried to consume her, and she had emerged victorious, a testament to the power of resilience, love, and unwavering courage. In the days following the trial, the atmosphere in Sara's neighborhood was transformed. People approached her on the street, expressing gratitude and admiration. She had become a symbol of resilience, her story spreading far beyond their community. Sara felt humbled by the support and newfound respect, but she was also acutely aware of the weight it placed on her. She had stood up to injustice, yes, but now people saw her as a beacon for change. It was a responsibility she didn't take lightly. The morning after the verdict, she sat with Lila at their small kitchen table, sharing a quiet breakfast. For the first time in what felt like ages, there was peace in their home. Lila, who had been so strong and brave through everything, looked up at her mother with a sense of wonder. "Mom," she said softly, "does this mean we won't have to be scared anymore?" Sara reached across the table, taking her daughter's small hand in hers. "It means that we stood up for ourselves, sweetheart, and we made a difference. But it also means that there's more work to do so that no one else has to go through what we did." Lila nodded, her young face serious. She understood more than Sara had realized. "So we keep standing up?" Sara smiled, pride swelling in her chest. "Yes, we keep standing up not just for us, but for everyone who needs it." As the day unfolded, Sara received a call from Theo Harrington. He congratulated her again, and then shared an idea that had been on his mind. "Sara, you're a voice people need. I'm getting calls from others who've had similar experiences, and they're looking to you for hope. Have you thought about starting a foundation, something that will continue this work?" Sara considered the idea, excitement stirring within her. A foundation. A place where others could find the support and courage they needed, just as she had. She thought of all the people who had reached out, all those who had suffered in silence. This could be a way to help them, a way to ensure that her victory didn't end with her own case. "Let us do it," she replied, determination strengthening her voice. "Let us give them a place where they feel safe, where they can stand up like I did." Over the next few months, Sara and Owens worked tirelessly, bringing the foundation to life. They named it Voices Unbroken, a symbol of resilience and the strength to rise above adversity. Their mission was simple but profound: to provide legal, emotional, and community support for victims of injustice and abuse of authority. The foundation grew quickly, thanks to the momentum from Sara's case. Donations poured in, volunteers stepped forward, and the community rallied around them. Sara threw herself into the work with passion, using her own experience as a guiding light. She spoke at events, shared her story, and encouraged others to come forward, reminding them that they were not alone, that their voices mattered. One afternoon, as Sara sat in her new office at the foundation, she received a message that brought her back to that fateful day in the park. It was from a young woman who had been harassed by an officer but hadn't known how to fight back. She wrote to Sara saying, "I thought I didn't have the strength, but watching you showed me that I do. Thank you for helping me find my voice." Reading those words, Sara felt a sense of purpose so strong it nearly brought tears to her eyes. She had not only reclaimed her own dignity, but had helped others do the same. She knew that there would always be battles to fight, and there would always be those who tried to silence voices like hers. But she also knew, now more than ever, that the power of standing together could overcome even the strongest barriers. On the foundation's opening day, Sara took the stage, addressing a crowd of supporters, community members, and families who had come to celebrate. She looked out over the faces, each one filled with hope, and began to speak. Voices Unbroken exists because no one deserves to feel powerless. We all deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. When one of us is hurt, we all feel that pain. And when one of us stands up, we all grow stronger. The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing the sentiment that had brought them all together. In that moment, Sara felt an overwhelming sense of unity, a bond forged by shared struggle and collective resilience. After the event, Lila ran up to her mother, wrapping her arms around her waist. Her eyes shone with pride. "Mom, you did it! You really did it!" Sara hugged her daughter tightly, a soft smile on her face. "We did it, Lila. And we're going to keep doing it." As they left the building hand in hand, Sara looked out at the city, her heart full of hope. She knew there would be more challenges, more fights to come, but now she also knew that she would never face them alone. She had a community, a voice, and a purpose that would carry her forward, no matter what lay ahead. Her journey had started with fear and pain, but it had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to the power of resilience, the strength of standing together, and the unbreakable spirit that could turn even the darkest moments into a source of light.